This week on Obsessed with Wine.
I remember sitting at the blending table with my boss, and we put together that final blend before we were sending it toward the bottle. And we took that first sip, and we both just sat back and went, whoa. And it was just, you don't get those whoa moments very often. And it really was just a special moment to sit and reflect on.
Hello, wine enthusiasts. My name is Wesley Cable, and I want to welcome you to another brand new episode of the Obsessed with Wine podcast. Sterling Vineyards is one of the most recognizable wineries in Napa due to its famous gondola that whisks people up the hill to the winery, to the spectacular views of the valley. This week's guest is Sterling Vineyards winemaker Lauren Kopit. In this interview, we talk to Lauren about the great wines being made at Sterling. She goes into detail about some important techniques they use in the winery to make their wines, and why she says that she wants to work at Sterling forever. So grab a glass of your favorite wine. It's time for Obsessed with Wine. All right, so tonight I'm going to welcome Lauren Kopit to the show tonight. I'm really excited to talk to her. She's the winemaker at Sterling Vineyards in Napa, California. And for those of you who don't know, Sterling Vineyards is owned by Treasury Wine Estates, which is the fourth largest wine company in the world. They own brands like Penfolds, BV, Beringer, Stag's Leap, to name a few. Lauren, I'm going to ask you just to get started here. What's the advantage of being owned by such a big company as a winemaker? Are there any advantages to that?
Absolutely. The wine industry is such a collaborative industry, and everyone shares knowledge and experience and, to a certain extent, resources. So being owned by a parent company like Treasury Wine Estates gives us an even smaller microcosm of knowledge and experience and collaboration. We partner with our sister wineries all the time. And if we're ever in a pickle and we need to borrow a press or use a couple spare barrels or something, we can call our friends down the road and have something work out. So it's a really cool company full of motivated people that just want to make great wine.
With working for a big company like Treasury, right? Do you have flexibility to do what you guys want to do in the winery? If you think something will make better wine, can you guys just do it? Or is there more of a process for getting things done like that?
It's really collaborative, and I'm really lucky to work with a great team that is very open to ideas and feedback. Huge amount of experience in the company. And I do think that if we had an opportunity to make something new, I could at least send it up the channels and see who's interested. I like to think of it as a benefit that I don't have to come up with the crazy ideas all on my own. We've got amazing folks that work in the tasting room and run our hospitality, that run our wine club, that run different departments, and we all work together. So if I have a crazy idea, I love sharing it. But at the same time, there are so many people coming up with great new things to try that there's all sorts of experimentation to a certain extent going on all the time.
So do you feel, working with Treasury, the big company, right? Do you feel the resources that they have available? Like, is that obvious to you in just the facilities and things that you guys get to work in, or is it not that way?
Totally. Treasury is one of the more technologically advanced companies that I've gotten to work with. Granted, I've been at Sterling since 2014, so I've been doing that for a long time. Making wine at Sterling and getting to also work with the Beringer team, there's automated pump overs and, live bricks and temperature measurements, and we're experimenting with redox sensors and latest and greatest when it comes to pressing and sorting. And, it's nice to have the resources to be able to trial things and to be able to have some pretty awesome technology.
All right. So for those who don't know Sterling, I don't know if there is anybody who doesn't know Sterling, but it's such a beautiful place. It's such a great place to visit because it sits up on the hill. It's some of the best views you can get, of the valley and of Napa and all that. So if you take the gondola ride and all that stuff, it's very impressive. Now, I didn't realize that some of it was damaged during the glass fire. So you guys aren't even open right now. Is that right?
Unfortunately, yes. Sterling's been around since 1964 is when they broke ground on that hill. Peter Newton founded Sterling, and between 64 and 73, he built himself a Mediterranean paradise up on that mountain. He loved visiting the Greek islands, and that's where he got his inspiration for the stucco and the archway and the architecture. And at the end of the day, he wanted people to come and share his paradise. He created a visitor experience that is, to this day, unparalleled with our self-guided tour, where our visitors not only get to come up the gondola, up the tram to the top of the hill with those beautiful views, but they get to walk themselves above our production facility. So they get to see our crush pad. They get to see where we do our fermentations. They get to see the barrels. And of course, there's some beautiful patios where they can sip on some wine and enjoy some beautiful views. Sterling's always been a pretty wonderful place to visit. And it's not new. It's been that way the whole time. Fast forward to today, has been one of the most widely visited wineries in the Napa Valley. As you mentioned, everyone knows Sterling. When I get to go and pour wine and meet people, everyone has a Sterling story. They met their partner at Sterling. They were proposed to there. They went there for their high school prom. Everyone's got something. And so it's always been really special to be part of Sterling. As far as the glass fire, yes, we were impacted. Thankfully, stucco and concrete are naturally fire resistant. So the vast majority of our property is just fine. And that beautiful winery is still up on that hillside. The biggest thing that we get to update is the tram. We are replacing the 1970s era tram. Construction is underway. I believe we have shipping containers on the water right now. I heard somewhere between 75 and 100 individual containers, which is insane to think about. We're hoping to reopen sometime maybe middle of next year with a state-of-the-art, updated, brand new way to get up to the top of the winery.
All right, so let's talk about you a little bit, Lauren. So where did you grow up, and did you grow up around wine? Was that part of your life growing up?
So I grew up in Southern California, born and raised in Orange County. Yes, the OC. And I lived there until I was about 17 and then came to Northern California for college. Did I grow up around wine? Well, my mom drinks a lot of wine. So that's her joke, is that she's the reason I'm a winemaker. But outside of that, not a whole lot of wine. Did my undergrad at UC Davis. And everyone thinks that's where I found wine. Ironically not. I studied microbiology and didn't take a single viticulture or enology course the whole time I was there. 2009 was graduating with that degree, and it was a really rough time to find a job. So I applied to everything I could get my hands on, and that included harvest lab position at Franciscan. My first time to Napa was my interview for that job. I showed up in a suit and heels, and you can imagine how that went when the lab manager came out in grubby jeans and a t-shirt and looked at me and said, "You dressed up? All right, let's go see the winery." Turns out I really enjoyed that interview and that location, that place, and was offered the role. So my first wine position was in the lab. Didn't know anything about wine at that point, to the extent that the winemaking team had done a comparative tasting of Napa Cabernet, and us interns were asked to clean it up. So we take the bottles over to the sink, and the lab manager goes, whoa, if the winemakers are done with the bottles, we have the opportunity to try them. And I went, oh, okay. And they go pick one. And I said, oh, I don't know anything about wine. And they stare at me like I'd grown a third eye or something. And we had an impromptu tasting right then and there of this is Cabernet. And I joke that it was all downhill from there, because finding wine was definitely harder on the pocketbook, but the best decision the best thing that's ever happened to me, in all honesty. From there, I did a longer-term internship at Matchbook Wine Company. They're located outside of Davis in a little town called Zamora. And that was where I really got to work more closely with the winemaker and see the vineyards and taste wines and learn that, okay, the winemaking piece is the piece that I want to do, not just use the science. And I figured I'd apply for jobs and also apply for grad school. Never thought I was going to go to grad school. figured I'd just get the experience and work my way up that way. And Davis was the only school I applied to, and somehow I snuck my way through admissions. Ended up doing the master's program in viticulture and enology.
What a great story. That's really cool. So when you were going to Davis and your degree was microbiology, right? What was the goal at that time?
Oh, I had no idea. I knew what I didn't want to do. I think on some level it was, I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a vet. I'll figure something out. And that's why I was just applying for everything. Very, very glad that I found wine instead of, I really enjoyed the laboratory courses and the lab work that I did while I was there. But I think there's more to my personality than just the science. And I think it's a more fulfilling career path that I found myself in.
So when you got that first job as the harvest lab intern, right, at Franciscan, did the microbiology degree, did that really help you in what you were doing there? Like, did everything just make sense because of your degree?
A lot of it did. And being at a place like Franciscan, which was similar size to Sterling at the time, we were fairly focused in on the lab side of things. We would pull samples and we'd run analysis. We didn't really get to do a whole lot else, which at the time I didn't know what else there was to do. And I had so much practical application that I got to learn that every day was like a whole new thing. Even if I was still running the same sulfurs and alcohols and acids, it was a different wine, or I got to pull it from a different tank, or I got to ask a different question. So I took the lab skills that I had gained and the microbiology knowledge that I had and started to kind of piece it together and find where that fit in with wine.
I want to go back to your degree, your master's degree at Davis. Is it hard? Is a master's degree in viticulture and enology, is that a hard degree to get?
Yes and no. And the reason I say that is it really depends on your background coming in. I was really lucky to already have this super rigorous science background that I could build on. And so a lot of the topics and a lot of the new learning that I got to do was just that. It was building. I didn't have to start anything from scratch. So it was definitely challenging, don't get me wrong, but it fit very naturally into what I already knew. And it allowed me to really focus on the things that I didn't know. I imagine that somebody who didn't come in with the same background might have a more difficult time. And there's a lot of people that will do the undergrad program at UC Davis rather than the master's. And a lot of the initial coursework is the same. And so the foundational learning that you get from the master's degree is the later part of the undergrad degree. There's a lot of overlap and you get to know a lot of people. In fact, some of the folks that I know from Davis, I was their TA because I was in grad school while they were doing the undergrad, and there was, like I said, some overlap. I think the most challenging thing for me with my degree was my research. I studied actually with a food science professor, Dr. Maria Marco. She focuses on lactic acid bacteria and branches out from there. And she is a perfectionist and has super high expectations, which is where I perform the best, when I know that I have high expectations that I'm living up to. And I learned so much from her and I wouldn't change a thing, but it definitely was the hardest part of my degree was the research I was doing.
So at what point did you make the decision that I want to be a winemaker? When did that happen?
I was really lucky. That was in 2010 during my second internship. I couldn't imagine, getting as lucky as I did in any other path. Between the winemakers at Franciscan, Janet Myers and Jay Turnipseed and Marla Carroll were three of the winemaking team there who I'm still in touch with. I give them the credit for keeping me in the wine industry. Had I not had a wonderful experience with them, very patient, answering all my questions, being available. You hear about the Napa winemaker that shuts themselves in their office and you never hear from them. This was not that person. And I've told all of them more than once that I credit them with making my entry into the wine industry kind of a no-brainer. But the winemaker from Matchbook, he's still there, Dan Cederquist. He is a true Renaissance man. He throws pottery. I believe he might play an instrument. And he's just got this wonderful soul that is so driven by the passion for what he does. So to work with two very inspiring winemaking teams back to back before I'd even studied the topic was definitely pretty key into my origin story, as it were.
So I see also you worked in a tasting room at some point in your adventure before you became winemaker, obviously at Sterling. So what was that experience like, working in the tasting room? It's one of those things I've always wanted to do. Like, I think it sounds fun, and just to chat with people about wine all day and that kind of stuff. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but how was your experience there?
So I did two very small stints in the tasting room. The one that I would probably think being the most formative was at Turkovich Wine in Winters. I poured wine on some evenings and weekends while I was getting my master's. That was so fun. You get there, they let you know what's open and what's on the menu. And especially on a Friday night or a Saturday into Saturday night, where they stay open till the evening because everyone just goes and has a glass of wine after work or after dinner. It's just fun. Everyone's happy to be there. So it's easy to have a happy energy back. People don't really show up for wine tasting grumpy. They show up excited. And when you're excited, it just has great energy. But exactly, chatting all day about what's in my glass and where did it come from, and then asking questions. It's kind of like being a bartender, but it's even easier because I don't have to make the drinks.
It's already made, yeah. So you never found yourself saying, maybe I want to work in hospitality? That was never a thing for you?
I just don't think I would be as good as some of the really wonderful hospitality folks that I've met. It takes a real passion to dedicate yourself to creating an experience for people. And I think that I have other talents that are more on the science and the making of the wine. Don't get me wrong, love hosting groups and giving tours and working events. In fact, that's some of my favorite parts about my job. But I think that given the science background that I have, I'm better suited to the back end for the day job.
So 7 years ago, you started at Sterling. Is that right? 7 years ago?
It's about 8. My full-time career has been 7, but my last internship, after I worked a harvest in New Zealand, I got my last internship, which was my first harvest at Sterling.
So I see there's a quote on the website that I thought was pretty cool. It says, I was at Sterling for 1 week, and I knew I wanted to work there forever. So I thought that was pretty cool, because people don't say those things about the company they work for. People move on, in a year or whatever. So that's kind of struck me as an interesting quote. So I just wanted to ask you, what was it that made you feel that way?
So Sterling is a really special place, but beyond the place, the people are what truly make it special. When I first arrived, it was myself, the head winemaker at the time, Harry Hansen, and the white wine winemaker at the time, John Hazak. And the red wine winemaker was out on leave. And so it was just the three of us. I started in June of 2014, where most internships would start in August, because they needed somebody to keep an eye on the place while they went out on vacation. So my first week I had 2 bosses. My second week I had 1, and my third week I was the quote winemaker on site. Harry was very reachable by phone, and I texted him about 17 times a day for that week. But I was given a lot of responsibility very early. The team there I mentioned how Treasury is full of people that are passionate about making great wine, and my experience with that truly started at Sterling. The rookie on the team had been there for 6 years. Our longest serving gentleman at the time, I believe that was his 28th or 30th year. The knowledge of the cellar work and the how-tos of winemaking was so inspiring. That cellar team has forgotten more about winemaking than I could ever hope to learn. And everyone was just so willing to teach, and I was a sponge. Tell me about this pump. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you're doing. And they would stop and they would show me and they would explain. And there's so much knowledge. it's just a group of people that really care about each other. And to this day, through being purchased, through reorgs, that core team, I still consider a few of them some of my closest friends in the industry and practically family at this point. But it just was such a positive and inspiring atmosphere. It struck me and there was something that clicked. So I then proceeded, of course, to tell my bosses, they'd say, well done on something or thank you for this. And I'd say, if you hired me permanently, I could do this for you all the time. Said it often enough that at one point I was told, Lauren, if there's a position that's open, we'll let you know. But otherwise, we get it. You like it here. And then piped down for about a week and then kept right back at it. Worked myself out of the internship as internships end. Spent 3 weeks working on pouring wine at Sterling on the self-guided tour. And then our operations manager at the time asked me what I was up to. They were preparing for ISO certification and she needed somebody to write the seller training manual. So I spent 3 months writing a 400-page document and then worked myself out of that job and worked quality control at the bottling facility that was Diageo at the time and just kind of stuck around. I wasn't ready to move on and I got really lucky that a position opened up. I joke that I talked my way into the assistant winemaker job and that was July of 2015 was when I started again.
So you saw something you really wanted and you went for it and it worked out for you. That's a great story. What's the toughest thing to do as a winemaker?
Honestly, I think for me, it's the vineyards. There's so much that you can't control because it's nature, it's farming. And I've always been really lucky to have amazing vineyard managers, viticulturalists, grape growers to learn from and to work with. You go out there and I'm full of questions. I always want to know, what am I looking at? What do I see? So I can try and keep it in mind because all this stuff only happens once a year. The confidence to go out into a vineyard, to know the state that it's in, to understand, does it need leafing? Does it need any sort of shoot treatment? And then when we get into harvest, tasting and identifying the ripeness based on tannins and sugar and acid levels, it's complicated and there's a lot of instinct that goes into it. And that's where a lot of the art behind winemaking comes in, making those decisions. But for me, I know my experience will continue to grow over the next, 30 years. But for right now, that for me is the make or break moment because great wine comes from great grapes. It starts in the vineyard 100,000%. So if I get great grapes, my job is to not screw it up.
So you can't like everything about a job. So what is one aspect of the job you don't like? There's got to be something.
Well, Cabernet at 9 a.m. is pretty tough to stomach, pun intended. But outside of that, which everyone always gets mad at me when I complain about tasting wine, outside of that, I think it's just the ever-changing nature of what we do. The constant in our business is change. Yes, we do the same things every year, but the year, the people, the weather, the world, it's always going to bring something different, some variation upon what we're doing. And I like a really good plan. I'm a great planner. My plan A is always excellent. And then my plan B is excellent when it has to be. And then by the time I get to plan W, I'm kind of grumpy about it. So, what it really comes down to is the constant is change. I don't love change. I've learned to adapt and to be nimble. At the end of the day, if everything could be the same, it'd probably be boring, but it would be a little easier. It's definitely challenging.
So if you had to explain to the people who, what's your winemaking style?
So because great wine comes from great grapes and it all starts in the vineyard, I want you to taste that sense of place. So everything is about the fruit. It's about respecting those vineyards and making sure that that's what you're really picking up. I love oak. I love barrels. I love all the different, tricks that we all have. But at the end of the day, it's all about the fruit. So I'm looking for not necessarily a fruit forward, but definitely a concentration of fruit and being able to pick a place that is special and consistently special and focusing on that. I also very much prefer focusing on tannin quality, which again comes from the vineyard, comes from the grapes, comes from that how you treat those grapes through their fermentation during harvest. If you can keep your tannins ripe and developed and elegant and balanced, then, as you're tasting the wine, it's a supporting character to the fruit instead of that being the first thing that you notice.
Let's talk about some of the wines now. So I was doing some research on some wines, and you were nice enough to give me some good examples of some wines. And so I've got this Sterling Vineyards Platinum Cabernet here. So that's the first wine I want to ask you about. So where do the grapes come from for this Platinum Cabernet?
Absolutely. So the beautiful thing about Platinum is it is Napa Valley Cabernet. So we can bring the grapes in from anywhere we want across the valley. Most years, Platinum Cabernet will come from the north end of the valley. Sterling is located in Calistoga, as many people know, which is the furthest north valley floor AVA, the last one before you head over into Sonoma by way of Knights Valley. It's a very unique place. It is very warm during the day and actually gets pretty cool at night thanks to the Russian River Valley and the breezes that'll come through that corridor. So you have this really amazing temperature swing from day to night called a diurnal shift, and it just makes for very concentrated flavors and allows the tannins to develop pretty gradually as long as we don't get a crazy heat wave. So Up Valley fruit, Calistoga, Diamond Mountain, St. Helena are usually where we're getting a lot of the fruit for Platinum. It's slightly different every year, just depending on what's calling to us. But we do like to look at the balance between valley floor fruit and mountain fruit for Platinum.
Does Sterling own a lot of vineyards, or do they get a lot of fruit from other places?
Yeah, Treasury is one of the largest landowners in the Napa Valley. If you look at all of the different wineries and the vineyards, most of our fruit for Sterling is internal, as we call it. It's owned by Treasury. We do have some long-term partnerships with some growers that we have been very successful with for a lot of years, but most of it is self-managed.
So I see that some of the fruit comes from certain vineyards. So Diamond Mountain Ranch, like you mentioned, there was a mention of Bale Lane Vineyard and Moore Ranch, just to name a couple of them. But how does this decision get made that we're going to take this from this place and this from this place and this place, and we're going to make this? Like, who makes those decisions on where these amounts of grapes are coming from?
So it's definitely a team effort, right? Everyone's got a boss. So do I. I report to our director of luxury winemaking. Her name's Margot Van Staveren. She's a very talented winemaker in her own right and probably pretty well known, especially on the Sonoma side. She and I work together based on what Sterling has done in the past. And if there's any new opportunities, maybe there's a young vineyard that's coming online, or maybe somebody else isn't making a wine in the group and we might be able to work with some fruit from one of their vineyards. Typically, though, having worked with Sterling for going on 8 years now, I've gotten to know which vineyards put out fruit of a certain quality and certain caliber. And so you really can go in and you can say, okay, Platinum Cabernet, this is a reserve Cabernet. So we're looking for a certain concentration of flavor, a certain concentration of tannins, and a richness in the palate. And we can go through and come up with Plan A, which is where the grapes are assigned to. And then, of course, every ferment is its own magical live creation. So maybe we picked Peterson Ranch, which is in Diamond Mountain. Maybe we picked Block 4B. That was the one we thought from that ranch. We were aiming toward Platinum. And then all of a sudden we're tasting through the blocks, and Block 3C is just super dark color, crazy bright fruit flavors, insane amounts of tannin that's just velvety and lush. And we go, well, hold the phone. That may need to go to Platinum. And so we do these kind of recalibrations throughout the wine's life to really make sure that as we're tasting, we're making sure that the grapes we thought we had turned into the wines we think we want.
So as far as fermentation for this Cabernet, what is it fermented in? And, how do you guys make it?
So most of the fruit for that wine would have been in stainless steel tanks, and a small amount would have actually been in concrete tanks. And we don't do anything really crazy. We bring the berries in whole cluster if we can. If we can't, at least whole berry. They go and get destemmed and whole berry into the tank. What vintage are you drinking by any chance?
2017.
So that was the first year that we had our state-of-the-art reserve winery at Sterling. So our optical sorter, and the first year with the concrete tanks. Once we get the grapes into the fermenters, it's 2 pump overs a day, depending on the volume of the tank, maybe 10, 15-minute pump overs. And realistically, we're tasting every ferment every day and evaluating to see how are we extracting color, how are we extracting tannin. Do we need more pump overs? Do we need longer pump overs? Do we need shorter pump overs? Do our best to get the ferment dry before draining, because that makes everybody's life easier. But if we find that the tannins are in that zone where we want them, and waiting till all the sugar is gone would over extract the wine, we can ferment dry once it's drained. It's a little trickier, but we can do it. So tannins are really the priority. Sugar is just that pesky, get rid of it sort of thing at that point. We don't typically do a whole lot of extended maceration. We have, especially in Calistoga, it tends to respond quite well to a little bit of extra work. And if the ferment is calling for it, if we're dry and we're still extracting tannin and it's still feeling really velvety and supple, we'll keep going. But typically, about 2 weeks on skins and get it in a barrel and see how it grows up.
So I want to go back to pump overs real quick. I obviously know what they are. I've done a lot of them. One of the hardest things I ever had to do was a 2-hour pump over manually, and it was brutal. So for those who don't know and haven't done it, what's the purpose of a pump over, and what is it for?
When you are fermenting red wine, you are doing that with the skins and the seeds inside the tank. We basically take the berries, put them in there. The weight of the berries on top of each other will actually pop the berries at the bottom, which is how you get juice. And over time, you have a pocket of juice at the bottom. Once we add the yeast and you start fermenting, yeast eat sugar and they produce carbon dioxide, so bubbles, and alcohol. So as the little CO2 bubbles are bubbling up from the bottom of the tank, they are taking those skins and those seeds and they are pushing them to the top of the tank where they form what's called a cap. A cap can be very loose or it can be quite firm, especially if the fermentation is warm or large. I used to tell people that if you have a big enough tank and your fermentation is going strongly enough, you could actually stand on top of the cap and it would support you. We do our best not to let that happen because we don't want it to get that thick. So we do a pump over where we actually pull fermenting wine. It's somewhere between juice and wine at that point. Pull it from the bottom of the tank using a pump, send it over the top through a hose, and then we have a little sprinkler that goes in circles and basically gently sprinkles the wine on top of that cap. That allows the cap to break up and submerge slightly. And also, you don't want the top of the cap to dry out because then you run the risk of getting some microbes that we don't want growing on the top of your cap. Nothing bad will come from the microbes, except they might not make the wine taste very good. So we avoid that with a pump over. Because that is a constant process as the yeast are fermenting. You want to do that 2, sometimes 3 times a day, depending on how long your cellar team works realistically. The amount of time is super variable. I imagine the tank that you did a 2-hour pump over on was a pretty big tank. maybe holding like 30 or 40 tons. So most of the tanks that I work with are somewhere between 10 and 20 tons if I can manage it, sometimes even smaller. So somewhere between 10 and 30-minute pump over is usually about the max that I'm working with. But realistically, you want to make sure a certain volume of liquid moves from the bottom over the top, because that's how you're predicting how much tannin is extracting. As the wine trickles through the cap, you are pulling tannin from the little cells in the grape skins and seeds and pulling that into the wine. So if you're pulling more tannin than you want, you do a shorter pump over. If you're not pulling as much tannin as you want, you do a longer pump over.
So you guys also make a reserve Cabernet Franc that I saw. In Cabernet Franc, is one of my favorite wines. So tell me a little bit about that Cabernet Franc, if you can.
Cab Franc is a delicate grape. It is a tricky one sometimes. Ours is from our Treasury Vineyard in Calistoga. So if you're driving north on Highway 29, it's Maple Lane is where Tammany is, just south of Sterling. Gorgeous rocky soils, so you've got well drained. You don't have a lot of water standing in the soil. Beautiful vines. That fruiting zone's probably about chest level, so it's where the berries are on the vine. Not too high, not too low, kind of just in that Goldilocks zone. My goal for Cabernet Franc is to avoid certain green flavors, for lack of a better description. That is kind of what Cabernet Franc is known for. It can verge from leafy into floral. We try to stay on the floral end where we can, and ultimately to make something that can be as powerful and concentrated as a Cabernet, but with more of a floral, delicate fruit profile. It's 100% French oak, usually about 60% new barrel, but the barrels that we're working with are typically medium plus toast. So a very delicate oak flavor. We want something that's really going to support the fruit, not overpower it. So you might pick up a little bit of vanilla. And I highly recommend, my favorite food pairing that exists is Cabernet Franc with lamb.
I'll take that down. I'll do that. Those are two good things.
They are. I've tried it more than once with different Cabernet Francs, and I have yet to be disappointed with it.
When you say 100% French oak, 60% new, what does that actually mean? Does that mean 60% of the wine is put in new barrels? The other 40% is put in a neutral or some other kind of barrels? Is that what it means?
Yeah. So basically what we consider a new barrel is a barrel that has never had wine in it before. It's a barrel that we got from the cooperage, came to the winery, it's been toasted, it's been assembled, but it hasn't had wine in it. So that's what we call a new barrel. Outside of a new barrel, you have a used barrel, which can mean a plethora of things. You'll often hear barrels referred to as first fill, which would be a new barrel. Second fill, meaning it's the second time we put wine in it. So that would be a used barrel that's being used for the second time. Third fill, so on and so forth. Neutral barrels are tricky because when you put wine in a barrel, you have your oak staves, right? You have your barrel. There's tannin and flavor that both can come from the contact in the barrel. The wine will seep into the wood and it will extract flavor and tannin. So that process doesn't just stop. You'd have to use a barrel many, many, many times for it to be truly neutral, which some wineries do. Typically, though, we would refer to a used barrel as opposed to a new barrel, which just means that you might pull some flavor, you might pull some tannin, but the majority of it has already been extracted from that first wine. For the Reserve Cabernet Franc, typically we'd be using second fill barrels. So yes, 60% of the barrels. So if we have 20 barrels of wine, math is hard, but you'd have 12 of them that were new for the first use for the first time and 8 of them that were second.
How long will you guys use a barrel before you get rid of it?
Typically about 5 years. We find that we can keep them clean. Wood being a porous material means that microbes and things can live in there. So we have steam treatment, we have ozone, we have hot water, we have all sorts of ways to get as much of those friendly critters out of there as we can. Critters meaning microbes. But after a certain number of uses, there's only so much cleaning that you can do. We also, at that point, you wouldn't get as much oak impact, if any. So we might move those to a different program. We might work with another company that would use them for spirits or something else. So there's always a home for a barrel. People ask me for barrels all the time.
So there's a couple more wines I want to ask you about real quick. One of them is a St. Helena Malbec that you make. Malbec is such a great grape and it makes such amazing wines, but for some reason, and maybe it's just in my wine circle, it doesn't seem to be as big as like a Cabernet or something like that. It is such an amazing grape. So for those people who aren't familiar with how great it is, what are some of the characteristics that you get from a Malbec?
So Malbec is almost like a Chardonnay in that you can make it into anything you want. You can do Chardonnay 1,000 different ways. You can do Malbec 1,000 different ways. But at the end of the day, you're going to get a very juicy fruit profile, a lot of your dark fruits, blackberry, plum, probably medium to heavy bodied as far as the amount of tannin. Our Malbec personally tends to be more on the medium bodied side and very, very fruit forward. The Bale Lane Vineyard is on Highway 29 at the corner of 29 and Bale Lane. Some of the biggest berries you've ever seen. This clone just has these huge, huge berries. And so we do bring the grapes in. We might do a small saignée. Saignée is one of those winemaker tricks that not everybody talks about, but essentially you pull some of the juice out of the tank before the fermentation gets going. That allows the remaining juice that's in the tank to have more contact with the skins than you would have had before when you had more juice, and allow for more tannin and more color, making a more balanced wine. We'll do a saignée on the Malbec in order to make sure that we can get the concentration of juice, the concentration of fruit, the concentration of flavor and tannin and color to make a very balanced, lovely, lovely wine. It's different than a lot of Malbecs that you'll taste out there, but again, you can make Malbec into anything. And in fact, one of my favorite tastings I've ever done is a Malbec tasting where we had a few Napa Malbecs, a couple of Sonoma Malbecs, an Argentine Malbec, a French Malbec. We kind of went the whole spectrum, and there's a lot out there for Malbec.
So one last wine I want to talk to you about is the Iridium Cabernet. So tell me about that. Is that the top of the line Cabernet? You guys only make a certain on certain vintages, that kind of thing. So tell me about that.
Yeah, Iridium is what we call our flagship. It is our highest and best of the best reserve wine that we make. When we want somebody to taste something really special from Sterling, it is Iridium. The name came from the periodic table because in case you hadn't already gathered with my science background and all the technological terms that I bandy around, winemakers are nerds. And Sterling, we played on sterling silver. That's where we got the name platinum, being a precious metal. Iridium is an even more rare and precious metal. And Iridium Cabernet is our rare and precious wine. So we taste every vineyard block, and the best of the best gets aimed at Iridium. And we do those status checks, like I told you, throughout the life of the wine, pick our favorite lots, and then go through each lot and pick our favorite barrels, taste every individual barrel, put them together, taste the blend. And if it's not just knock your socks off Cabernet, we will go back to the drawing board and we'll pick different barrels, different percentages. It's a real labor of love. I mean, some of the vineyards we're out there even picking certain vines and not other vines because we're really trying to carve out the best fruit that we can get. It's a pretty cool looking bottle. It's got a big silver
It is cool
cap.
looking. Yeah.
And it was actually the official wine of the Emmy Awards for a number of years. We got to go and share that with the Emmy Award nominees and winners. And for a few years there, every award winner would take home a bottle of Iridium in a customized case to go with their trophy that they won.
All right, so I've got 5 questions for you here, and these are all wine related, okay? There's nothing weird in here or anything like that, but I just want to ask you about. So the first one is, give me the name of a place in Napa that makes unique wines that you enjoy other than what you make.
Flora Springs, they are on Highway 29. They are one of the more unique buildings that you've ever seen. They're right next to Gary's Market. And it's this beautiful building with these like swirls on the outside. And they make different varieties like Sangiovese and a few other unique things, and single vineyard Cabernets and approachable stuff. And they do it all very well.
All right. So the second one is, besides Napa, what's your favorite wine country to visit?
I would probably say it would be France. And that's only because if I could only drink one kind of wine for the rest of my life, it would be champagne. And I was lucky enough to visit Champagne a few years ago, and I look forward to being able to explore more of the French wine country.
What is a wine that you don't make now that you would love to make one day?
It would probably be a sparkling wine, but a traditional method. So Sterling was making a sparkling wine for a few years, and we'd partner with another winery to do some of the secondary fermentation. But to be able to do a fully in-house traditional sparkling wine, I think would be quite an experience.
So of all the wines you've made, what is the one that you're most proud of?
So my first vintage at Sterling was 2014. I helped bottle the 12s and the 13s, but 2014 was my first grape to bottle wine. And there's 2 wines from that vintage that I remember sitting at the blending table with my boss, and we put together that final blend before we were sending it toward the bottle. And we took that first sip, and we both just sat back and went, whoa, that is special. And it was the 2014 Iridium and our 2014 Yates family single vineyard Cabernet. And it was just, you don't get those whoa moments very often. And it really was just a special moment to sit and reflect on.
So how many bottles of those do you have around the house? Any of those left?
Yeah, I've hoarded a few. I've probably got a few of them waiting to, break out for that special occasion.
So Lauren, that's all I have, and it's been awesome. It's been great. You don't even know how much I appreciate it, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you for being so kind and answering all my questions. Eventually, when Sterling is back up and running, I would love to go back over there, try some Iridium if you guys even have that available. It's been great. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast. It was the fastest hour of my life. Time flies when you're having fun. And yes, cannot wait to welcome everybody back to Sterling next year. And you will have to be on the list to come back, and we'll show you around the place and taste you through some wines.
I want to thank Lauren Kopit and Sterling Vineyards for the great interview this week. I love to talk to winemakers because they can give us some insight into how they make the wines that we all love. I can't wait to get to Sterling when they reopen next year to get some of that Iridium Cabernet Sauvignon. Thank you so much for listening. If you've missed any episodes of the podcast, I invite you to go to the show website at www.obsessedwithwine.net. I also encourage you to find Obsessed with Wine on Twitter and Instagram. I would love to hear from some of you on some guests that you would like to hear on future episodes. I will see you next week for another episode of the Obsessed with Wine podcast. Until then, cheers!